Hi there. Welcome to class again. Today's subject is covering Chapter 10, which is called Religion and Politics. Wow, two things you should never bring up in polite company. Taken separately, these are two of the most volatile subjects in the world. Put them together, and it's like dynamite, isn't it? But let's see what sense we can make of them and see if we can find a way to discuss them without going insane. That's a joke. I'm sure none of you are insane. Or even if you have been, that's okay too. I'm fairly insane myself most of the time. Yes, and that's a joke as well. Our book opens with a discussion on terrorism, specifically religious terrorism. So, what is terrorism itself? I'm sure you know that it's some sort of violence. The literal translation of the word terrorism comes from the word terror and means to cause to tremble. And in the beginning, the word was first used to describe violence by the state against the people, regardless of which state you're speaking about, which government you're speaking about. But now it's used to describe violence that is used to further a group or an individual's agenda in some way. Now, a man named Grant Wardlow, Kessler tells us, says that there's actually two conditions that must exist before an act of violence can be considered an act of terrorism. These are the two conditions. The first is that the target group, those people being coerced, is distinct from the immediate victims, those people being harmed, whether they're being bombed or shot at or whatever. And the second condition is that the act itself must create a condition of extreme fear in the target group. And this extreme fear in the target group will act as a lever and help supply pressure in order to ensure that the terrorist demands are met. Well, what does this mean? Well, first off, understand that Wardlow is saying that an act of violence that's only aimed at a particular immediate victim is not an act of terrorism. Terrorism is violence that's applied to a particular person or people for the express purpose of coercing other people or another person. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that in terrorism, you have to have two parties outside of the person doing the terrorizing. So if you take the bombing of the World Trade Centers on 9/11, there were the terrorists who had the planes driven into the two towers and the Pentagon as well. And then there's the people they're trying to coerce. So actually, you end up with three different sets of people: the immediate victims, the people in the towers, the terrorists themselves, and who else? Who were they trying to coerce? You could say American citizens, which is true, but more to the point, it would be the lawmaking bodies of the U.S. They were trying to instill such fear in them by hurting their constituents that they would kind of roll over and give the terrorist what they wanted. That's terrorism. Now, somebody could walk into, I don't know, a mall and hold a gun on someone and even kill them just because they're that way. But that's not terrorism. Yes, it is certainly an act of violence, but in and of itself, it's not terrorism. With terrorism, you have to have those two conditions and the three parties: the terrorist, the people who the terrorists are trying to coerce, and the immediate victims. And I'm sure you get this. It's just a different way of looking at it. Now, we're talking today really mainly about religious terrorism. What's religious terrorism? Well, obviously, religious terrorism perceives itself as being blessed and sometimes even mandated by some sort of sacred or superhuman power. Religious terrorism generally assumes the complete and total rightness of its cause because of this sacred blessing. So, religious terrorism has the blessing and sometimes even the mandate of sacred power. At least that's what the terrorists believe. Religious terrorism is actually illustrated pretty well in the case of bin Laden in our book, and we may come back to it. But I've given you mainly what I want you to understand about religious terrorism. What makes it so dangerous and what makes religious terrorists so much more dangerous than your garden variety, any other type of terrorist, is that when you believe that the sacred power wants you to do something, you have no reason to give it up. People might say, but what if they get scared? Well, if you get scared, but you believe the sacred power is asking you to do this or wants you to do this, then it won't matter. You're going to muscle through. Because remember, sacred power is that power that everybody believes is the biggest, the most of the most, as it were, of everything in your life. And so you want to please the sacred power because that's where your life actually comes from. And that's the big danger with religious terrorism. So let's move on a little bit, though. Kessler is really good about giving us some ways that religion and politics engage with each other. That is the relationship between religion and politics. In fact, he gives us, is it 4 or 5 patterns, as he calls them, of religion and politics. That is, how do religion and government work together? Well, let's look at these. I'll just tell you what they are and then we'll discuss them. There's state over church, church over state, toleration, the separation of church and state, and number 5 is withdrawal. So let's start with state over church. In this particular pattern, although state and church, and when we say state here, we're just saying government, and when we say church, we're referring to any religious body. So in this pattern, although state and church both have their place in a society, if there's ever a conflict between the two, then the state or the government has the deciding vote. In the book, it evidences the nation of England between the 16th and the 19th centuries. Now, I don't know if you know this, but between the 16th and the 19th centuries, the Roman Catholic Church was the state. Oh, I said that wrong. I'm so sorry. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, the Church of England was the state church in England. And when I say it's the state church, I mean it was supported by the government and it was run on taxpayer dollars. If you were a priest, then your paycheck every month came from the state. That's a good way to look at it. Why do you suppose that was? Because before the 16th century, it was different in England. Now, when we say state over church, remember that if there's ever an issue between the Church of England in the 16th through 19th centuries and the government gets the deciding vote. Well, how did this happen? Well, it happened because before the 16th century, the Catholic Church was the state church. And in fact, at that time, England enjoyed a church over state pattern of engagement between religion and politics. But something happened in the 1500s. And what happened is that King Henry decided that he wanted a divorce the Catholic Church wouldn't allow him to divorce. This is one of his 6 wives, and I can't quite remember which one it was. So basically, he threw the Catholic Church out of the country and made his own church called the Church of England, sometimes referred to as the Anglican Church. Here in America, do you know what the Anglican Church of America is? It's the Episcopalians. So, although they are a little bit different than the Church of England, it's the American branch. So, what happened is that when the Constitution was drawn up for the Church of England, King Henry made darn sure that the reigning monarch was the head of the church, which meant that if there was ever an issue with church and state, the decision would rest with the state or the government, or in this case, the monarch. Worked out pretty differently for King Henry, but that's how it started. Now, if we back up to number 2, church over state, this is simply the first pattern reversed. In this one, if there's ever an issue between church and state, then the church has the deciding vote over the state. And in England, up until the 16th century, this is the pattern that was used. The presiding church, the state church, was the Roman Catholic Church. And they told King Henry flat up he could not have a divorce, even though he was king. People didn't like that too much. King Henry didn't like that very much. But I will tell you that this is not the only place that we see church over state throughout history. It's been in several different places, just a couple of those. In the 16th century, Calvinism in Switzerland held the church over state pattern. And the church that John Calvin had founded was the state church. And in fact, in America, before it was the USA, I might add, but in America, the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay Colony wanted that church over state pattern as well. One of the reasons for the immigration of the Puritans from England to begin with is that they wanted to be the reigning religion. They believed that the Church of England was not a pure church anymore. They thought it needed to be purified, and they wanted to run their own government, basically. When they did come to America, however, even though they didn't like the fact that the Church of England told them what to do in England, in America, the Puritans wanted anyone who lived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony to conform to the Puritan Church. And in fact, they set in place some laws that said if you don't come to church, you'll be put in stocks or you'll be imprisoned. So it was very much, for a short time, a church over state situation. There's some problems in these particular patterns, church over state and state over church. One of the problems is that you have to have one religion and only one recognized as the true religion. You can have no dissenting churches. You can't have other than. You can't be, if the Church of England is the church in a church over state situation, you can't have another right church. So this leads to some issues. I mean, who gets to decide which church, which religion in general, is going to be the church, whether it's state over church or church over state? That leads to some problems. So there's a couple of ways we can address this. One is through something called toleration. And this is the pattern that England chose after the 19th century and indeed follows this to this day. In toleration, there is one official state religion that receives government support, but other religions and other churches are allowed. They just don't get any tax money. Toleration we see in Scandinavia. The Lutherans are the state-supported church there in England. As I said, they went to that, and the Anglicans, the Church of England, is the state-supported church there. And in several places across the globe, you can find this idea. Now, that worked for some governments, but not all governments wanted any kind of state church. They didn't want the church itself, whether it was Islam or Christianity or Hinduism or anything else, to be supported by taxpayers. And this led to the fourth pattern in religion and politics. Well, obviously, the separation of church and state. And this is the pattern we have here in America. Article 6 of the Constitution states, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States." Basically, you don't have to be a member of any particular religion in order to run for office. You can be dog catcher and have no religion whatsoever. You can be dog catcher and be a Hindu. You can be dog catcher and be a Baptist, for that matter. But it doesn't matter. Your employment within the government, your election to any government office is not dependent upon what religion, if any, you are a member of. It just doesn't matter. So we have the Article 6, and we also have Article 6, by the way, is known as the Establishment Clause. And then we have the First Amendment. Excuse me, Article 6 is not known as the Establishment Clause. In the First Amendment, there's one that prohibits an established religion, and the other guarantees religious liberty. So in America, we say you don't have to, the United States cannot, listen to me, establish any type of state religion. It's against the law. It can't say this is the official religion of the U.S. Also, it cannot say you have to believe in any religion at all. It says you are free to exercise whatever religion you want to exercise or not, meaning you don't have to have any religion at all. And you are still a citizen of the U.S. with all the rights and responsibilities of a citizen. So that's kind of how we do it here. Now, is it always that simple to separate church and state, to say that they're two separate things and shouldn't interfere with the other? No, it's not. That's why we argue about it a lot, right? Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with arguing, especially if we say it's discussing instead of arguing. But the fact is, this is how we work out the issue in America. And I don't know about you, but I think it's a great idea. I don't like people telling me what I should or shouldn't believe. That's personal, right? And then there's number 5. Number 5 is called withdrawal. This is almost the opposite of a pattern of engagement. Within this, in withdrawal, a religion will refuse to have anything to do with politics or government, and the degree varies according to the religion. This will allow a religious group, this is how they see it, they believe that it helps them better serve their sacred entity, their idea of the sacred, without interference or without their focus being shifted onto secular type things. The Amish and the Mennonites are good examples of this. I will tell you that not all sects of Amish and Mennonites enter into complete withdrawal from society, but many of them do. The Jehovah's Witnesses do it to a certain degree as well. Jehovah's Witnesses don't run for public office. They don't believe in voting, and they don't believe in serving in the military. That they're just totally, completely against that. With the Amish, I don't know if you know this, but they will not work for the government in any capacity. They will not be firefighters or policemen or anything like that. They also don't vote and don't serve in the military. There are several different, as I said, sects of Mennonites, but that's Amish and Mennonites, but that's your basic understanding of it. There's something to be said for this. The earliest Christians, right after the resurrection of Jesus, kind of entered into this idea too. Of course, they thought that Jesus' second coming was coming very quickly, and they didn't want to get bogged down in the cares of the world. And they wanted to be ready for Jesus' return. And so they didn't want to worry about government and things like that. There's a lot of good people in many different religions that practice withdrawal. And unfortunately, there are some groups like Jim Jones People's Temple that ended up practicing that as well. The issue with withdrawal is when it goes too far, like with Jim Jones, and people become so completely removed from any other society that new ideas don't come in, help can't come from the outside, and in some ways, especially if you have a leader that is not the leader that they should be, you can be a sitting duck for bad things to happen. Now, there's another thing I want to talk about today, and that's theocracy. Kessler includes it in the book, although he doesn't put it in these list of patterns. In some ways, you might consider it a subset under the church over state pattern. So let's just address it now. What is theocracy? Theocracy is a political theory that subordinates human rule to the rule of God. Very simple. It's not a hard thing at all when you think about it. It's the idea that a people will, all of their laws will come from their understanding of the sacred powers rule. Okay. Not such a bad thing. Of course, one thing that you have to have in a theocracy, very obviously, is a state religion. Somebody has to tell you which one, right? Because usually in a theocracy, in fact, all the times that I know of in a theocracies have one way of looking at religion, and that's the only accepted way that there is. Now, a lot of times we think about theocracies as something we see mainly in Islamic countries, especially the ones that undergo Sharia law, and there are several versions of that. But there are also several versions of theocracy that are based on Christian ideas that are supported and encouraged here in the U.S. Now, as you know, we have the separation of church and state, but there are some people who don't want that. Some people would like the U.S. to be classified as a theocracy. They'd like to make the country's official religion Christianity. And they believe that Christians should set the rules and government for the entire U.S. Now, some people probably aren't actual theocrats completely, but they would still like to have Christianity declared the official religion and then practice something along the toleration pattern that we just spoke about. So Christianity would be the official religion. It would receive government support, but other religions would be allowed. They would be tolerated. Probably when it comes to theocracy in the U.S., one of the most severe, if you will, is something called dominion theology. Dominion theology states that Christians have the right and indeed the responsibility to rule the land because of a particular Bible verse, Genesis 1, verse 28. And let's see if I can find a Bible real quick. I've got I don't know, 41 of them at least. And of course, I don't see one here. I'll just look it up on my phone. Give me just a second here. I'll tell you what, I'll pause while I find it. That'll be easier.